Hi guys, the topic of this video is probably one of the most horrific things, second to serial killers, that I can think of. And if anybody's watched any of my videos, they know that there's one thing I will not stand for in any way, shape, size or form is the abuse of children. The case I'm going to talk about today is one of two extremely important cases of child abuse in the UK. It happened, I can't even remember the county here in the UK that it was done in. It happened in Tottenham, North London, and it was in a very similar area to another case that happened not long after, which was Peter Connolly, which happened in 2007, and it was the same area, which is the London Borough of Haringey Children's Services and the NHS, which is the British National Health Service, which is relatively free, with a few exceptions obviously. The same childcare authority, Haringey, is the same one that handled the Victoria Climbie and the Baby P case. And the problem is the cases are extremely similar, and things were meant to have been put in place after the Victorian but obviously it didn't happen. Now, for my American viewers, you probably know nothing of this case, and to tell you the truth, I don't blame you. The two cases were 7 years apart, and like I say, this was one of the worst cases to ever have come out, and there were a lot going on with this girl. Now, she was born in the, where was she born? She was born, and I'll put the spelling underneath because I am probably going to butcher the pronunciation, Abobo Cote d'Ivoire, in the Abobo area of the Ivory Coast. Now, she lived with her family. She left the Ivory Coast with her great aunt, Marie Therese Conda. Like I say, I'm probably butchering pronunciations, but I'll leave the links to the articles down below. And if I can find the episode of Crimes That Shook Britain, they did a full episode on this, as well as another documentary. If I can find both of those, I'll pop them up in the iCard, because they obviously do go into more depths than this. And she was tortured by her guardians, which was her great aunt and her boyfriend. Her death led to a public inquiry that led to major changes in child protection in the area and in the UK as a whole, followed by the case of Baby P 7 years later, who died in the same area. Now, she left the Ivory Coast with her great aunt, and then, who was a French citizen, to go to France to have a better education that could be provided by her parents on the Ivory Coast. Then they moved to London in April of 1999. Now, we don't know an exact date, we just know April. It's not known exactly when the abuse started. And there is speculation that there was some abuse before she got with the boyfriend, but it worsened once she got with the boyfriend. If I itch my nose, I'm sorry, I've got a cold, so it's very itchy, as you can imagine. I'm actually lucky because this morning I lost my voice, but I have my voice at the minute, so I'm taking the opportunity while I can, and while the husband's distracted, because this is one case that upsets him majorly. It worsened when Kando and Climbie met and moved in with Carl Manning, who became Kundo's boyfriend. Like I say, I'll leave the names and everything down in the description. I am butchering pronunciations. I'm sorry. And the abuse involved, but is not limited to, burnt with cigarettes. Remember that one because I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about that in a second. She was tied up for periods of time longer than 24 hours in the bathroom and in the bathtub. And she was hit with bike chains, hammers and weights. Now, the reason why I said remember the cigarettes is she was admitted to hospital at one point, and some of the hospital staff wanted to raise the alarm and said that she had that she was being abused. But one of the doctors, obviously the nurses can't do it, it has to be a doctor that does it. Although the nurses might have suspicions, might relay those suspicions to other people and may write them in the paperwork. At that point it had to be signed off by a doctor, and a doctor said it was scabies when it wasn't. There's actually a picture of her when she's in hospitals and she has burns here. And she's smiling, and she was so, they actually said, the staff at the hospital said that when the aunt wasn't there, she was happy, she was giggling, she was laughing, she was having fun with the other people, or the other kids on the ward, that she was happy-go-lucky. And then as soon as the aunt showed up, she was defeated, she was withdrawn, she was scared, she was petrified. Some of the nurses said she was even shaking. And they didn't like the way that she spoke to her or the way she treated her, and it was literally like, you do as I say. And it was clear that the young girl was petrified by the one person who was in the position to protect her, which I think is ridiculous. If you're charged with the protection of a child, you protect that child. I think there were, when the pathologist did the autopsy after her death, Dr. Nathan Carey, and Home Office pathologist, found 128 separate injuries, scars, many of them cigarette burns, and described them as the worst case of child abuse he'd ever encountered. And she'd been in contact with police, social services, which is the UK equivalent of child protection services, social services departments of 4 local authorities, which is the equivalent of child protective services, the NHS and the NSPCC. Now the NHS, like I said, is our National Health Service, and it is relatively free compared to America anyway. And NSPCC is one of the charities that is very much one of the forefronts for helping children. There have been cases where it's actually done harm, but for the vast majority it's been pretty good. Now, she was declared dead on the 25th of February 2000 after months of abuse and neglect by the people who were meant to care for her. She originally, they didn't know that her real name or anything because she was going by a false passport. The great aunt originally went to the Ivory Coast to take a separate child, but something had happened so she couldn't take that child, so she took Victoria instead. And when she took Victoria, the child was meant to live under the name of Anna, and she is now known as Victoria. And the parents obviously are absolutely distraught in this, and you can't blame them. They thought that they were trusting a family member with their child, to go to a country with a better education system than theirs for a better life and a better future. They didn't know that they were putting their child, in the hands of a monster. This woman is a monster, and her boyfriend is a monster. During the trial, the great aunt had the gall and the audacity to blame the mother for everything. She was just over her 9th birthday when she died. She turned 9 on the 2nd of November the previous year. And like I said, the fact that the abuse was reported numerous times, that the abuse was seen by multiple people, including health professionals, numerous times, is ridiculous. I think there was a broken spine as well. Yeah, on the 24th of February 2000, she was taken semi-conscious and suffering from hypothermia, multiple organ failure, and malnutrition to the local Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. Now, we all know my feelings on my child isn't sick, my child is possessed, which is apparently what she claimed. The advice that the pastor, minicab was called and to send Climbie to hospital. Minicab driver was horrified at the Climbie's condition and sent her to the nearby Tottenham ambulance station. Instead, Climbie was rushed straight to the accident and emergency department in North Middlesex Hospital, where she was transferred to intensive care unit at St Mary's Hospital. The ambulance crew who drove her to St Mary's described how, although Condor kept saying my baby, her concern seemed not quite enough, and Manning seemed almost as if he was not there. Climbie died the following day at 3:15 local time. The pathologist who examined her noted 128 separate injuries and scars on her body, and described as the worst. But I think that she had a broken spine. Double check. But yeah, not long before her death, she'd been seen by a medical professional, and the medical professional, who was a doctor that had immigrated from, I think it was India, and she was relatively new to working with children and so on. One of the documentaries goes into this quite in depth, and she'd missed quite a few injuries, including broken ribs, an injury to the spine, and the burns and scars that were all over her body. Now, like I said, one of the doctors tried to say it was scabies, and the only problem with that is scabies and cigarette burns are very different. But a doctor mistook the cigarette burns for scabies, but when the Home Office pathologist looked at the body, he said, no, that's not scabies. And this pure child was absolutely tortured for months. She was in and out of hospital for months. There was one instance where, because they didn't want to have to put up with her or have to raise her, what they did was they said that the boyfriend had abused her, and the aunt said, yeah, he's abused her, and then when Child Protective Service, said that he'd sexually abused her, Child Protective Services said, well, if that's true, then we have to get the police involved, at which point she retracted that. If she didn't want to raise the child, she could have just surrendered the child, but instead she kept making up bullshit after bullshit, and there were numerous instances where Child Protective Services would be knocking on the door, and she would be in the apartment on her own, tied to a bathtub, unable to speak because she was malnourished, freezing cold, and people say they were overworked. People say that the caseload was too high. And if that is true, then it still is now, because there are big cuts in that department. And that may be true, but when you are dealing with a child and multiple people are saying something's not right here, and some people are saying something's being done to this child is filled with fear, this child is filled with panic, and you keep sending that child back to the people that are doing it to her. That's horrible. That poor child thought that the people who were meant to protect her were in her life, but those people abused her, and then the people that were supposed to step in and say, no, you're not allowed to do that, didn't do that, and thus ended up causing the child more damage and more pain than she should have ever gone through. The public inquiry was quite comprehensive and named multiple instances where Victoria could have been saved, and numerous instances where she could have been pulled out of that house, put into, granted it's the foster care system and no foster care system is perfect, but in this instance it would have been a hell of a lot better than what she was under. And they implemented these changes, but like I said, the same area, the same authorities were in charge of another case, which is the Peter Connolly case, where a toddler was beaten to death by his mother after suffering more than 50 injuries over an 8-month period. And I think it was at the hands of the mother, Tracy Connolly, her boyfriend Stephen Barker, and Jason Owens, which is Stephen Barker's brother, were the ones that were charged and convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child. The mother, having pled guilty with the charge, a court order issued by High Court in England had prevented the publication of the identity of baby P, which was lifted on the 1st of May 2009, and an order sought by Haringey to stop the publication identities of the mother and boyfriend were granted, but expired on August 10th, 2009. This case, Barker was found not guilty of murder by a jury. The mother pled guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child or vulnerable person. Earlier in the trial, Owen and Connolly had been cleared of murder because of insufficient evidence. Baker was found not guilty by a jury. A second trial took place when Connolly and Baker, under aliases, faced charges related to the rape of a 2-year-old girl. The girl was also under the same charge of the same area. Barker was found guilty of the rape, while Connolly was found not guilty of child cruelty charges. The defence lawyers argued that the second trial was nearly undermined by bloggers publishing information linking them to the death of Peter, which could have prejudiced the trial. The jury sentencing both trials together took place on the 2nd of May 2009 at the Old Bailey. Connolly received a sentence of imprisonment for public protection and was ordered to be imprisoned until deemed no longer a risk, which I think is the same sentence that Rose West has, and some other people that are deemed monsters, like Peter Sutcliffe, who is a renowned serial killer in the UK. With a minimum of 5 years. Barker was sentenced to life imprisonment for rape, with a minimum sentence of 10 years, and a 12-year sentence for his role in the death of Peter to run concurrently. Owen was also jailed indefinitely for a minimum term of 3 years, and sentences were criticised for being too lenient by the NSPCC's chief. But it enrages me that the authorities whose job it is to protect children allowed a little beautiful, dark-skinned, pretty, lively, vivacious little girl to die at the hands of her carer, her great aunt, and that person's boyfriend, despite being known to every single authority in the area, to the hospitals, to the police, to the social services, to the NHS, to the NSPCC. Nobody did anything. And then for it to happen 7 years later in the exact same area to a child even younger, and then the people responsible for the death of that little toddler then to end up being involved in the abuse of another child, makes me sick. There is one thing that will make my blood boil at any point, and that is the harming of children. They are innocent, they are worth protecting, they are worth our love, they are worth our respect, they are worth our undying, unabridged affection. I can't have kids, and when I hear of cases like this, it hurts, because there are people that have children that shouldn't have children. There are cases in the US where things like this happen. I am aware of that. And every time I hear of a case of child abuse, regardless of the who, the what, the where and the when, it hurts. Yeah, there are instances where it is fabricated, but that is very few and far between. Because a lot of the time, people in the police, in the child protective services, in social services in this country, in the NHS, in healthcare, have the training to speak to a child to figure out whether it's something that the mother said, whether it's something that actually happened. That is one thing that we are getting better at, is identifying through the child's language if it is true. I'm not saying that every case is true, I'm just saying that the vast majority are. And some cases that aren't true usually get found out for not being true. Now, I love kids. If anybody hurt my nephew or my niece, you don't want to be in the area when that happens. There's one thing me and the husband always agree on when it comes to kids, is that you don't hurt kids. You don't hurt them because they are vulnerable. They are weaker. They are more susceptible to injuries than we are. They are more trusting than we are. They don't have the distrust of people, and a lot of kids trust everybody and like everybody. And for this to happen to a little girl who was known to the authorities, and then everything was supposed to be made better, and they said never again, and it happened again 7 years later, is enraging. These children should be protected. Now, I'm not saying the system's perfect, because it isn't. I'm not saying that everybody who hurts children is discovered, because they aren't. Because the principal thing behind why they are not discovered, why they are not found out, is fear. And children are very susceptible to fear. But one thing I will go to hell and back and fight for is the protection of children. And cases like this make me sick. It's horrible. It is horrible. And for the aunt to blame the parents for sending the child to another country for a decent education, to me is abhorrent, and to me is sickening that they have the gall to say something like that. If you believe that a child is being abused, whether it's you've seen something, you've heard something, or something's just off, report it. Yeah, it would be, I would prefer 1,000 instances being reported and being found unsubstantiated than one more child to go through this. When the whole thing with the Daddy of 5 thing kicked off, I had flashes of what would have happened if these two were vloggers. Would they have done what the Daddy of 5 did? Would they have blamed everybody else but themselves until they were backed into a corner and had to realise it was their own fault? These two, even to this day, say that they did nothing wrong and that the child misbehaved, or the child was possessed, or the child was under some spell, because apparently they thought that she was possessed. And instead of going to the doctors, and this is one thing that really made me mad, she was unconscious, she was thin, she was cold, she was non-responsive, so they took her to a church. I'm not even going to get started on the whole thing of parents who think that they can heal their children through prayer and this, that and the other. I'm not even going to get started on that at all, because that is just a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. But please protect children, and please protect those that are under our charge. Please do something to help them. They need that help, they need that support. And if you don't, and somebody else doesn't, then that child could slip through the cracks, just like she did, just like Peter did. 2 little kids have a representation of so many that lost their lives because people didn't report that they were being hurt. Anyway, like I say, it's a bit of a serious episode. I'm sorry about that. But this is a case I've wanted to cover for a while. And I know this video is going to get demonetized, but there you go. Anyway, with that being said, stay safe, be good, have fun as best you can, and I will see you over the weekend, hopefully.